1492. This date is known by almost everyone by heart, because we've been told the same story since childhood. Christopher Columbus discovered America. Books wrote it, schools taught it, documentaries told it. And for years, almost no one questioned this story. But what if the whole story isn't quite like that? What if Christopher Columbus wasn't the first European to reach America? When you first hear this idea, it sounds ridiculous, because people don't want to accept that something they've known to be true for years might actually be wrong. Yet history sometimes leaves very strange traces that go unnoticed for centuries, until a single discovery begins to change the entire picture. Today, many historians are pursuing exactly this question. Was America really discovered in 1492? Or did other people set foot on those same shores exactly 500 years earlier? The answer to this question doesn't take us to Spain, nor to Christopher Columbus's ships. This time, we turn our course much farther north, to the icy waters of the North Atlantic, to seas where fog lingers for days, where massive waves toss wooden ships like toys, and where people once believed they had reached the edge of the world. It was right here, about 1,000 years ago, that a group of seafarers continued sailing westward. Their goal wasn't to discover a new continent. They didn't even know such a place existed. They weren't looking for gold. They weren't trying to build a new empire. What drove them forward was simply the desire to know what lay beyond the horizon. Days passed, weeks passed. Then, a landmass appeared on the horizon. Dense forests, freshwater sources, animals they had never seen before, and a new land completely unlike their own world. They gave this land only one name, Vinland. But there was something strange about it. The stories of this voyage continued to be told for centuries, yet no one believed them, because there was no evidence, no city, no harbor, no graves, not a single trace to prove they had really been there. For this reason, historians long regarded Vinland as nothing more than a beautifully written legend, until a few stones emerging from the ground began to change the entire story. 1960, the northeastern coast of Canada, a harsh landscape where the wind rarely stops and where people thought no one could survive for months. This wasn't a place that attracted historians' interest. No one expected a discovery here that would change world history. Norwegian explorer Helge Ingstad and his wife, archaeologist Stine Ingstad, had been following the trail of old Norse sagas for years. Many people thought they were chasing shadows. After all, there were only sagas, no proof, no maps, no single document giving an exact location. Yet they didn't give up. They visited small fishing villages. They spoke with elderly locals. They listened to stories passed down through generations. Because sometimes history is not kept in books, but in people's memories. One day, a local showed them an interesting spot. There were unusual rises in the ground. At first glance, they looked like natural hills. But when examined closely, their shapes didn't seem natural. Excavations began. In the first days, the stones that emerged didn't attract much attention. Then a little more earth was removed. A wall appeared. Then a second wall. Then connected rooms. As the excavation area expanded, the researchers held their breath, because the structures they found did not resemble anything built by the indigenous peoples of North America. Long rectangular houses, walls reinforced with thick turf blocks, door arrangements typical of Norse architecture. Every new find strengthened one possibility, but the researchers still weren't certain. Because big claims require big evidence, then came the small piece that changed the fate of the excavation. Iron slag, a seemingly worthless black stone fragment. But laboratory analysis showed it was no ordinary stone. It was a byproduct of iron smelting. And at that moment, the silence was broken. Because the indigenous peoples of North America at that time did not produce iron. This technology belonged to the other side of the ocean, to Europe. As excavations continued, more pieces were found. Rivets, iron fragments used for ship repairs, loom weights, traces of workshops. Every new discovery pointed in the same direction. This wasn't an ordinary camp. This was the first concrete evidence that people who had crossed the ocean had actually lived here. A story that had been considered a legend for centuries was finally supported by real evidence emerging from the ground. But this discovery only answered one question. Yes, someone had reached America centuries before Columbus. Now, however, a much bigger mystery emerged. Since they managed to do it, why didn't they stay? Why didn't they build great cities? And most importantly, why was this journey forgotten by the world for a full 500 years? Today, most historians agree on one point. The Vikings really did reach the American continent. But what's interesting isn't the discovery itself. The real mystery is why this discovery didn't continue. Because when we look at history, we see a strange gap. On one side, there are seafarers who managed to cross the ocean. On the other, a settlement that completely disappeared just a few years later, as if someone had torn out a few of the most important pages of history and thrown them away. So what happened? The first possibility that comes to mind is war. The Norse Sagas mention indigenous groups called Skraeling. According to the stories, the first encounters were relatively peaceful. They traded. They exchanged animal skins. The newcomers tried to understand their surroundings. But this peace didn't last long. Small misunderstandings grew, a fight, then violence. According to the sagas, the Vikings were very few in number. Facing them were indigenous groups who knew the land extremely well. Every day, survival became harder. But historians believe this wasn't the only reason, because reaching America was already an enormous achievement. The real difficulty was staying there. Imagine you are thousands of kilometers away from your homeland, no regular supplies, no fleet coming to help, no safe harbor to take shelter when needed. The smallest problem that could happen to a ship could mean the end of the entire settlement. Moreover, the climate was merciless. Long winters, violent storms, frozen sea routes, and months of loneliness. With each passing year, the cost of staying in America grew heavier. For this reason, some researchers focus on a different possibility. Maybe the Vikings didn't fail. Maybe they simply made the right decision. Because discovering and settling are not the same thing. They had found a new world, but they didn't have the population to sustain it. And one day, they quietly returned the way they came. They left behind no great cities, no fortresses, no monuments, only a few houses, a few iron pieces, and traces so small they would be forgotten for centuries. Perhaps this is why the world didn't remember them. Because history sometimes remembers not those who arrived first, but those who made the greatest change. But there is one final question waiting for an answer. If the Vikings' arrival in America was really known, did this information completely disappear in Europe? Or did it continue to live quietly? Because some historians think this story may have a much stronger connection to Columbus than we imagine. And just 21 years later, an admiral living in the Ottoman Empire prepared one of the most remarkable maps in the world, Piri Reis. His map didn't just show coastlines, it also showed how knowledge from different civilizations could accumulate over centuries. Perhaps this is why Piri Reis's map is still debated today, because that map doesn't just tell the story of one sailor's success, it tells the story of knowledge's borderless journey. From one harbor to another, from one ship to another, from one captain to another, and sometimes from one civilization to another. So when we look back today, it's easy to see Christopher Columbus, the Vikings, and Piri Reis as completely separate people. But perhaps their stories are connected by a much deeper bond than we think. One person's begun journey became another's collected knowledge, became another's drawn map, and eventually turned into great discoveries that changed the history of the entire world. Perhaps history has been asking us the wrong question for years. Who discovered America first? Maybe that was never the real question. Maybe the question we should have been asking is this: how can a piece of knowledge survive for centuries? How can it cross continents? How can it continue to live, changing hands among people who never knew each other? Because great discoveries are often not the success of a single person. They are the combination of traces left by people who never met one another over centuries. And perhaps the greatest mysteries of history are not the ones we have answered. They are the ones for which we still haven't asked the right question.